The room fell silent. The billionaire patriarch, Alexander Drayton, laughed so hard he nearly spilled his glass of champagne. His family echoed his amusement as they looked down at the young man standing awkwardly before them. "The CEO's son? He wants to compete with us," sneered Victoria Drayton, the eldest daughter, her lips curled with disdain. "Look at him. His suit's off the rack, his watch is a fake, and, oh, his confidence. Pathetic." For the first time, the young man's smile faltered. But in the back of his mind, he was already planning something that would shake the Draytons to their core. In the next 24 hours, the empire they had built for decades, $900 million of untouchable wealth, would begin to crumble, and no one in the room could see it coming. The Drayton family was notorious in New York. Their name adorned skyscrapers, charity galas, and luxury yachts. Alexander Drayton had clawed his way from a struggling real estate agent to the owner of a multi-billion-dollar empire, a family that commanded attention and respect, or fear. Victoria, the eldest, had a mind for acquisitions and a ruthlessness that made boardroom competitors tremble. James Drayton, the youngest son, was a socialite-turned-investor whose reckless bets on emerging tech had always been cushioned by the family fortune. Everyone knew that the Draytons were untouchable. But then came Ethan Clark, the unassuming son of a small startup CEO no one in the Drayton circle had bothered to notice. Ethan had been invited to an elite gala at the Drayton estate, an event meant for networking among billionaires and investors. The Draytons assumed they could dismiss him immediately. A boy with patched shoes in a crowded room of gold cufflinks and designer gowns, he would amuse them for a few minutes and be forgotten. Instead, he planted the first seed of chaos. The night began with laughter at Ethan's expense. Victoria whispered to her mother, "Do you see the way he is looking around? He thinks he belongs here." Her mother, Eleanor, smirked. "He won't last 5 minutes. That's what I like about him already." Alexander raised his glass to the group. "Let's make him feel welcome," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "After all, it's not every day we see someone with so little everything." The jokes, the smirks, the camera flashes, all recorded, all shared later by social media influencers present at the gala. By the time Ethan left, the world had already seen how the Draytons treated the son of a nobody. But what no one knew, not even Alexander, was that Ethan had a plan. He didn't come to the gala to beg for attention. He came to observe, to learn the weaknesses, to identify the cracks hidden beneath the polished marble of the Drayton empire. And within a week, the first domino would fall. It started with the smallest vulnerability. Alexander's investment in a luxury tech company, a seemingly untouchable stock, was built on a shaky foundation. Ethan, quietly contacting industry insiders, learned about the company's looming bankruptcy. One anonymous tip, one insider warning, and suddenly the stock that Alexander had inflated for decades began to wobble. The Draytons didn't notice at first. Victoria was too busy flaunting her new yacht. James was entangled in a multi-million-dollar merger with a South American mining operation that was later revealed to be riddled with fraud. And Eleanor trusted the right people to handle her finances, until she realized the auditors she depended on had been compromised months earlier. By day 5, rumors had turned into panic. The first media leak questioned Alexander's leadership, subtly hinting at mismanagement and poor oversight. Social media exploded, magnifying every small error. What started as a whisper on Twitter became a trending story: Drayton Empire in crisis. The Draytons, accustomed to controlling narratives, suddenly found themselves on the defensive. Ethan, from the sidelines, watched carefully. He didn't need to attack directly. All he needed was patience and precision. Every laugh, every sneer the Draytons had thrown at him was stored, every insult catalogued. And now, it would become a weapon. One morning, Alexander received a call that made him freeze mid-sip of his expensive coffee. His investment in the tech company had lost 40% of its value overnight. A competitor had leaked confidential reports that Ethan had quietly sourced. It was subtle but devastating. When Alexander tried to respond, he found the board members distancing themselves, sensing instability. Victoria tried to maintain her composure. "It's just a minor setback," she told James. But James, staring at his own dwindling portfolio, knew it was not minor. The empire's foundation, the $900 million that seemed untouchable, had cracks, and those cracks were about to widen. The next blow was public. A viral post appeared online, a video of the gala, where the Draytons mocked Ethan in front of dozens of billionaires. The caption read, "Rich, but so insecure. Drayton's arrogance cost them respect." By the evening, news outlets picked it up, analysts dissected it, and every insult the Draytons had thrown at Ethan became a symbol of their hubris. Alexander's anger was visible, but misdirected. He blamed his PR team, his advisors, anyone but himself. Victoria lashed out at Ethan on social media, tagging him in dismissive replies. James made a desperate call to his contacts, trying to salvage the failing merger. Eleanor stayed silent, the weight of her family's impending disgrace sinking in. Through it all, Ethan remained calm. He didn't gloat. He simply executed, step by step, exploiting weaknesses that had been exposed through arrogance and ignorance. The empire the Draytons had built wasn't invincible. It was fragile, propped up by pride, appearances, and old connections. And now, in a matter of days, all of that was beginning to collapse. The media frenzy intensified. Headlines read, "Billionaire family in turmoil." From gala mockery to market mayhem, the Drayton collapse begins. Young entrepreneur outsmarts multimillionaire family. Even Wall Street analysts, who had long considered the Draytons untouchable, started issuing warnings. Investors withdrew, partners hesitated, and within a single week, a fortune once considered invincible began eroding faster than anyone could react. And yet, no one saw the final move coming. Ethan's strategy wasn't about attacking. They never saw him coming until it was too late. Every public humiliation, every whispered insult at the gala, had been calculated into his plan. He knew that billionaires underestimated anyone beneath them, that arrogance was their greatest vulnerability. The Draytons, so confident in their untouchable status, failed to notice the storm brewing. By the time Alexander realized the extent of the damage, it was too late. Phone calls went unanswered, board members vanished, banks froze transactions, and every asset that seemed secure turned into a liability. The family that had laughed at a young man's shoes and cheap suit now faced a different reality. The world that had once bowed to their power was beginning to watch them crumble in real time. And Ethan Clark? He was just getting started. The morning after the media frenzy, the Drayton estate was unusually quiet. The grand halls, usually filled with laughter and clinking crystal glasses, felt like a tomb. Alexander Drayton sat in his study, staring at a screen full of declining stock charts. Every number was a dagger, each red line a reminder that their empire, once untouchable, was slipping through their fingers. Victoria paced the marble floor, her heels clicking sharply. "How could this happen?" she demanded, her voice trembling between anger and fear. "I told everyone we were untouchable." "Untouchable, Alexander." Alexander didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. He was running through every meeting, every deal, every stock move from the past decade, searching for the one mistake he hadn't accounted for. The problem wasn't a single error. It was a cascade of vulnerabilities Ethan Clark had unearthed with surgical precision. Eleanor, the matriarch, entered the room silently. Her presence, usually commanding, was subdued. She sat opposite Alexander, her eyes cold yet calculating. "We underestimated him," she said softly, almost as if admitting it aloud could somehow stop the damage. "We mocked him," Alexander said, finally breaking the silence. "We humiliated him. How could we have missed that he was capable of this?" The truth was brutal. Arrogance had been the Draytons' greatest weapon, and their deadliest weakness. Ethan had seen every smug smile, every derisive comment, and had turned them into ammunition. He hadn't attacked directly. He didn't need to. The family's hubris were collapsing from the inside. By midday, the financial world had begun to whisper about something bigger than a simple stock drop. Insider leaks, carefully orchestrated by Ethan through anonymous channels, painted the Drayton Empire as a house of cards. Analysts questioned Alexander's judgment, investors panicked, and the family's private creditors started calling in loans. James Drayton, the youngest, was the first to feel the personal sting. A luxury tech merger he had hyped on social media suddenly imploded. Partners pulled out, citing due diligence concerns, and the deal, which should have added tens of millions to his portfolio, collapsed in hours. Social media mocked him mercilessly. The Draytons can't even protect their own investments, read one trending tweet, accompanied by clips of the gala where Ethan had been ridiculed. Victoria's attempt to spin the narrative publicly only made matters worse. In a desperate video posted online, she accused Ethan Clark of manipulating rumors and spreading lies. But the public, already captivated by the underdog story, embraced Ethan as a genius outsmarting billionaires. The Draytons' arrogance had created the perfect story for a scandal-hungry world. Eleanor, meanwhile, discovered a hidden vulnerability in their financial portfolio. One of the family's most profitable subsidiaries, an offshore real estate fund, was under investigation for accounting irregularities. If this became public, the consequences could be catastrophic. Her usual advisors were nowhere to be trusted. Ethan had already seeded doubt among their closest associates, isolating the family. By evening, the tension was palpable. The Draytons gathered for an emergency meeting in the estate's main conference room. Screens displayed plummeting numbers, news headlines, and internal reports pointing to mismanagement. Alexander slammed his fist on the table. "We need a solution. Now, we can't let this continue." Victoria, attempting to stay composed, suggested a risky acquisition to regain credibility. "If we buy out Cortec, it will show strength, maybe stabilize the stock." James, exhausted and panicked, shook his head. "It's too late. Everyone knows we're vulnerable. We're the laughingstock of Wall Street tonight. Any move now will be seen as desperate." Eleanor leaned back, her face pale but resolute. "The problem isn't just money," she said. "It's reputation, and that's the hardest to recover. Ethan Clark isn't just attacking our finances. He's dismantling our image, piece by piece. And we don't even know him." Across the city, Ethan watched it all unfold. He had spent days mapping out their weaknesses, studying their personal and professional lives, and exploiting every misstep. The humiliation at the gala had been the opening move. The stock manipulations, the strategic leaks, the careful timing of viral clips, it was all part of a meticulously crafted plan. Yet Ethan remained calm. The Draytons were still in disbelief. They thought he was just lucky, a young upstart striking at random. But luck had nothing to do with it. Precision, patience, and observation were his true weapons. Late that night, Alexander received a phone call that would shake him to the core. A major lender, responsible for funding several of their high-risk investments, was freezing all lines of credit. Their largest portfolio of assets was suddenly illiquid. Panic set in like wildfire. Victoria screamed, "This is impossible. We've been untouchable for decades." But untouchable was a myth, and Ethan Clark was proving it. As the Draytons scrambled, Ethan made his next move, public exposure of their vulnerabilities in the tech sector. Anonymous blog posts, insider tips, and calculated leaks converged into a perfect storm. Analysts now questioned every decision the Draytons had made in the past 5 years. Investors fled. Partnerships dissolved. Their $900 million empire, once considered untouchable, was teetering on the edge. The family couldn't hide. Their security teams, once their pride, were overwhelmed by media vans and social media coverage. Every mistake was amplified, every failure broadcast. And yet, they still had no idea who was orchestrating their collapse. The Drayton estate had transformed overnight. The once grand halls felt hollow, echoing with whispered arguments and frantic phone calls. Security guards patrolled nervously, cameras monitored every corner, and assistants scurried to respond to emails, calls, and social media storms. The family that had once commanded respect now trembled under the weight of their own arrogance. Alexander Drayton, once the unshakable patriarch, sat slumped in his office. The stock charts on his screens had become a nightmare of red lines, plummeting values, and desperate warnings. Every asset they had leveraged for decades was hemorrhaging money. The empire that had taken a lifetime to build was collapsing before his eyes, and the face of the young man who had started it all flashed across his mind. Ethan Clark, calm, collected, and untouchable. Victoria, pacing in the adjacent room, was losing control. "We've thrown billions into the market, and it's still falling," she shouted. "Why isn't anyone stopping this? Who is doing this to us?" James, still reeling from his failed merger and tech investments, slammed his fist on the marble table. "It doesn't matter. Everything is unraveling. Our board is abandoning us, investors are panicking, and banks are freezing transactions. It's all collapsing. Victoria!" Eleanor, ever the strategist, remained silent for a moment before speaking. Her voice, usually soft, carrot steel. "We can't fight shadows," she said. "Finally, we're being attacked by someone we can't even see. And every move we make plays right into their hands." The following morning brought another blow. A major investigative report had been published, linking the Drayton's offshore funds to suspicious financial activities. The headline screamed, "Drayton Empire under scrutiny, billionaire family in crisis." From gala mockery to financial mayhem, is a $900 million empire collapsing? Alexander tried to fire off a public statement, but before he could, social media amplified every mistake, dissecting his words, twisting his intentions. Wall Street analysts predicted a full-scale collapse if remedial action wasn't taken immediately. Panic became contagious, infecting every corner of the family's world. In desperation, the Draytons called an emergency board meeting. The room was tense. Advisors shifted uncomfortably as the family faced a reality they had never imagined. Alexander attempted to assert control. "We are the Draytons," he said, voice trembling but still defiant. "We survive storms. We will stabilize this." But no one believed him. Not the board, not the investors, and not even the family themselves. Victoria's eyes burned with frustration. "Stabilize," she spat. "We've lost millions in days. Our empire is a joke online. Our credibility is gone." James, growing reckless, proposed a high-risk strategy, buying out one of Ethan Clark's emerging companies, attempting to absorb him into their network and neutralize the threat. The room went silent. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" she asked, her tone icy. "He doesn't just attack assets. He dismantles the people who dare to mock him." Meanwhile, Ethan Clark observed from afar. His plan had always relied on patience, observation, and subtle execution. He didn't need to confront the Draytons directly. Their arrogance had already done most of the work. By now, he had orchestrated several leaks exposing financial mismanagement, personal indulgences, and vulnerabilities in every subsidiary the Draytons controlled. Media outlets, investors, and even former allies turned against the family in unison. And yet, he remained unseen, a ghost guiding the storm. The Draytons, blinded by panic, started turning on each other. Victoria blamed James for reckless investments. James accused Victoria of mismanaging mergers. Alexander scolded Eleanor for underestimating threats, while Eleanor reminded them that arrogance had left them exposed. The family unity that had once been their greatest strength was now crumbling under stress. The next day, a whistleblower emerged, leaking sensitive internal communications to the press. The messages exposed plans the Draytons had for market manipulation, insider trading, and leveraging political influence, all legal on paper but morally bankrupt in public opinion. Stock prices fell further, investors withdrew, and the empire's image plummeted faster than anyone could anticipate. Ethan's brilliance lay not only in his strategy but in timing. Each action, each leak, each rumor was orchestrated to maximize psychological impact. The Draytons were unraveling from within, financially, socially, and emotionally. The media frenzy escalated into a spectacle. Financial news channels dissected every aspect of the empire's collapse. Social media memes mocked the family relentlessly. Even longtime allies hesitated to defend the Draytons publicly, fearing association with what now appeared to be a failing dynasty. By evening, Alexander called a private family meeting in the main hall, the room dimly lit by crystal chandeliers. The weight of days of stress and humiliation hung thick in the air. He looked at each of his children, then at Eleanor, and whispered, "We may not survive this, but we must try." Victoria's voice cracked as she responded, "Try? Try what?" "We're losing everything, Alexander. Everything." James, desperate and panicked, slammed his fist on the table. "We can't just sit here. We need a bold move, something to show the world we're still untouchable." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "There is no bold move that will undo the damage he has done. This isn't just financial, it's psychological. He has dismantled our confidence as a family. And until we realize who he is and what he's capable of, nothing will save us." Alexander swallowed hard. He knew she was right. For the first time in decades, the Draytons felt powerless. The empire they had built was no longer untouchable. It was vulnerable, fragile, and exposed. Meanwhile, Ethan Clark prepared for the next phase. He had observed every reaction, calculated every possible move. And now, the Draytons were exactly where he wanted them, isolated, panicked, and disoriented. The collapse was far from over, and he intended to exploit every opportunity with surgical precision. The stage was set for the next act. The Draytons' arrogance, their past mockery, and their inability to see the threat had led them here. But Ethan wasn't finished. Not even close. The dawn broke cold over Manhattan, but inside the Drayton estate, the heat of panic had reached a boiling point. The Draytons, once untouchable, now trembling, gathered in their conference room for what could only be described as a final reckoning. Their empire, worth $900 million, had been reduced to a fragile shadow of its former self. Alexander sat at the head of the table, shoulders slumped. The pride and authority that had defined him for decades were gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate determination. Victoria's sharp tongue was silent, her usual fire replaced by fear. James looked lost, fidgeting with a stock report strewn across the table. Eleanor, the matriarch, was the only one who remained composed, though even she could not hide the weight of reality. The truth was undeniable. Every asset had taken a hit. Partnerships dissolved. Investors abandoned them. Banks froze their accounts. Social media mocked them mercilessly. And the world was watching every misstep. Across the city, Ethan Clark watched the final pieces fall into place. He had never needed to confront them directly. The Draytons' arrogance had done the work for him. Each humiliation, each financial miscalculation had been calculated into his strategy. He had exploited every weakness, psychological, financial, and social, and now the empire was ready to collapse completely. The first blow came with a public announcement. A high-profile news outlet reported that the Drayton family's offshore accounts were under investigation, linking them to shady financial maneuvers. Investors panicked. Shares of the Draytons' remaining companies plummeted. Every attempt to stabilize the market only accelerated the descent. Victoria's last attempt to control failed spectacularly. She tried to launch a PR campaign, portraying the family as victims of sabotage by a rival entrepreneur. But the world wasn't buying it. Ethan's clever leaks had already painted a narrative. The Draytons were reckless, arrogant, and blind to reality. The final straw came when one of their largest creditors demanded immediate repayment of loans that had been extended for decades. The Draytons scrambled to find liquidity, but it was too late. Assets that were supposed to be untouchable had lost value overnight. Their yachts were suddenly liabilities. Their properties became collateral. Their reputation, once their greatest power, was gone. James, desperate, turned to Eleanor. "We have to do something. Anything. If we lose this, everything is gone." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "We've already lost everything that mattered. Pride, reputation, trust, they're all gone. There is no coming back from this." Alexander finally understood the extent of the devastation. The empire he had built with decades of ruthless ambition was in ruins. He realized that mocking Ethan Clark at the gala had been the first mistake in a chain that led here. Every sneer, every laugh, every moment of arrogance had been weaponized against him. Ethan's final move was subtle but devastating. Within hours, leaked documents revealed insider mismanagement, poor financial oversight, and personal indulgences, each tied to scandals that could not be ignored. The Draytons' empire imploded publicly. Investors withdrew completely. Creditors seized assets, and the family's name became synonymous with arrogance and collapse. The Draytons gathered one last time in the estate's grand hall, silent and defeated. Alexander looked around at his children and Eleanor, his eyes reflecting disbelief and grief. We failed," he whispered. Victoria, finally quiet, nodded. "We underestimated him. We underestimated a boy we laughed at." James, pale and defeated, added, "We thought we were untouchable, but no one is untouchable." Eleanor, resolute even in despair, said, "And now we must face the consequences of our arrogance. The world has changed, and we are no longer in control. Meanwhile, Ethan Clark observed from afar, his expression calm and unreadable. He had not only dismantled a $900 million empire, but had exposed the arrogance, pride, and fragility behind the billionaire facade. The Drayton's downfall was complete, a lesson in hubris, a testament to calculated patience, and proof that even the untouchable could fall. And in the quiet aftermath, as the world absorbed the collapse of one of its most storied dynasties, Ethan Clark began planning his next move, not out of malice, but because he understood power, precision, and the value of waiting for the right moment. The Draytons were gone from their throne, but the story of their rise and their catastrophic fall would echo through Wall Street and social media for years to come. The Drayton family, once untouchable, lay in ruin. The $900 million empire was destroyed. Their arrogance had been their undoing, and Ethan Clark had emerged as the unseen force behind their collapse, calm, calculated, and victorious. The empire was gone. The lesson was clear, and the world had watched it all unfold.